Yep.
Good evening, everyone. For what is the last session for today at LitFestX, we are joined by Cornelia Funke, who is a German living in Los Angeles, and she's live with us from LA. It's an early morning there, and Cornelia, thank you so much, and welcome to LitFestX.
Thank you very much for this exciting invitation. As you
Uh,
know, India is one of my favorite countries, so I'm very excited this morning.
Cornelia is a very well-known storyteller and illustrator. She has published all over the world in many languages. A lot of her work primarily is for children's books, and very fondly she says that now that she's got published in so many languages and her work is in so many languages, she sometimes feels that she's got lost in her own stories. And Cornelia, you have also recently launched your own publishing house. Tell us about this very exciting development.
Well, it had two reasons. One is that I'm a writer and an illustrator. So I always think that books are not illustrated enough in our time, that we should go back to the 19th century when almost every page had an illustration, or that we should understand this belongs together and is inspiring and does not hinder imagination. As you come from a very rich illustration tradition, you understand what I'm talking about. And for example, to do a classical fairy tale, to do that with the traditional illustration from their country, or to play with styles from our past, but nevertheless bring them a modern aspect. I would love to do all that in my own publishing house without thinking about, oh, will this sell and does this fit into the program of one of the big ocean liners of publishing. So I want to build my own sailing boat. My publishing sailing boat that will go into unusual places. The other reason was that my American publisher and my English publisher asked me to edit a published book. A book that was already published in Germany with great success. They wanted 2 changes to it. And I do not change my books for any country in the world. They all read the same story. I believe in that. And I believe in my readers all over the world. So I was forced to do it faster than I thought I would. And we will publish in 3 weeks.
So your first book is going to be out in 3 weeks, as part of the publishing house?
Yes, it will be the 3rd part of the Mirror World series, and it will be called The Golden Yarn.
How exciting, how exciting. I'm sure you're in the midst of a lot of activity. And
yes, I learn all about publishing now from the other side.
Right. Tell us a little bit about the dual roles you play. One, of course, is of a storyteller, and then also as an illustrator. How are you sort of able to grapple both? I mean, do you start out with the illustrations first, or does your story come first and then you try and make up illustrations for it?
Until about 2 years ago, I would have said, oh, I always start with the words and I write the story, and I actually do not work as an illustrator while I do it, and then I start illustrating. That completely changed over the last 2 years. I started to more and more start sketching a character before I wrote about him. And I write by hand. My first draft is always by hand in a big notebook. And by now, I often, for example, doing research at the moment on an Indian fairy tale and your motives, I sit down and I copy Indian art. So I sketch it in my notebooks to get into the feel, because I think that the pencil and the image often gives us more layers of a reality than the word does immediately. So it's very interesting. I'm surprised myself the most how important illustration suddenly is for me again.
And do you find that increasingly in children's books, given that today's children are so much more technologically savvy, with the iPads and computers, and they are using a lot of multimedia. Do you see a trend that your readers are demanding more illustration vis-a-vis text content?
The interesting thing is when I announced that I will from now on do more illustration, there was a very passionate reaction to that. Although publishers had constantly told me they don't need illustration, at least many. So yes, I believe we are a very visual culture and we are reinventing that. I think it's a wonderful thing what's happening. And because of the internet, we can see so many different visual influences and get inspired by such different visual traditions that for me, it's a very exciting time creatively. It's much more about collaboration again and much more about being inspired. I'm doing currently research on the 19th century, and I'm so surprised for how vast, for example, the Asian influence was on European art. We so easily forget that. And I think at the moment, we can pick from everywhere and be inspired and also understand the art and the storytelling of others. And the more I research, the more I think, oh my God, I live in a golden age in that all this is available for me. I used to look for material in libraries and books, but that can take a long time. It's easier to type in temples of Jaipur and get a photo on the internet and then draw. So yes, it's the audience is very open for it. And as you may know, I developed an app called Mirror World to show my world for my readers on an iPad, and decided to go this way because I was not happy with the movies. And right. I claimed my images, you could say.
Right. How very interesting. So, you've had several of your books being adapted into movies. Tell us a little bit about, how that's been going.
I had very, very many very good experiences. For example, shooting ink art, walking into an abandoned Italian village and suddenly meeting all my characters. Authors don't forget a thing like that ever. But the problem with it is, I weave for 2 years on a flying carpet and they give me back a handkerchief. And they say it's the same thing. And that's my problem with the movies at the moment, that my stories are so complex that I almost want to give them just a short story and say, okay, you do this one and make it bigger, Then you can, I would be interested to do film from a shorter literary text and say, add something to it instead of taking things away, which is my experience with the movies, that they first tell you what they have to cut and what they have to lose.
So you're not finding, movie makers, doing justice to your narrative.
Yeah, I think the usual format of a movie, the 90-minute, maybe 100 minutes, is a very problematic one for epic storytelling or for classical storytelling itself. Maybe you can tell one fairy tale in 90 minutes, but you cannot tell a novel of 500 pages in 90 minutes. It's impossible. So they try the impossible task. It's not their fault when they fail. So, for example, I'm very glad that the Game of Thrones is done as a TV series and not as a film with all the problems that still holds for adaptation, but at least it comes closer to the literary source.
Right. So are we going to be seeing a TV series soon on any of your books?
Well, let's see whether anybody will ask me. That is the only thing I would be at least thinking about. If I do not sell the movie rights for Mirror World at the moment, because it's just too dangerous what they will do with it.
Right. Whilst a lot of your work has been published in so many different languages across cultures, clearly when you're looking at, countries like India, China, Japan, where the cultural narrative is very, very different when it comes to children's books when it comes to illustration. These countries have a very different style of illustration, which has evolved over many, many decades and centuries. And how are you then adapting your existing books or even your new work to be, read by people in these countries?
Well, it's very interesting. First of all, I would love to collaborate on a picture book project with an artist from India, an artist from Japan, to see what different kind of interpretation they would bring to a story I wrote from my Western consciousness. To have that collide in a way, I think would be a very interesting project. And now that I have my own publishing company, I could do it. So the other thing is that when I started my research now on India and Japan, in Mirror World, I traveled through all the fairy tales of the world. So in book 1, I did the Grimm's fairy tales. In book 2, I did the French fairy tales. And in book 3, the Russian fairy tales. So now, of course, my path led to Asia. And as a friend of mine said, Cornelia, you have to always understand one thing about Asia. It has 2 suns, India and China. And I thought that was such an interesting concept that it already made me look at Asia in a different way. And then there's, of course, Japan. So you have all these incredibly dominant and visual cultures. So I still feel like a 5-year-old who walked into a new room I've never seen. And I'm at the moment building my own library on India and Japan. And I start from the beginning, which is the most exciting thing. Because now I know a little bit about your history by now. Now I know a little bit about your art. But I realized the art was already something I had seen. So I think it often starts with the images of another culture, that we meet another culture, long before we meet the words. Of course, everybody has seen the bronzes from South India. Of course, everybody has seen the Taj Mahal. But before we know anything, and that is for me something I take my notebooks and I copy some of your beautiful book illustrations, which is such a vast tradition. And it feels like I'm walking with my mind into the culture. And of course, it's very ignorant of me to say India, because India is not India. No, it's 1,000 countries in one. As a German, I should know that because there is no Germany. But you are much vaster and much more, different. I only know Delhi so far, so I'm still very ignorant.
well, Delhi is a good place to begin seeing India. We have a lot of different cultures, coming into Delhi. So if you started with Delhi, it's not a bad place to begin.
Good.
Your work as a storyteller. Clearly, I'm sure there is a method on how you try and sort of get into viewing that book, viewing that content from the eyes and from the imagination of a child. How do you sort of get into that mode?
Well, the interesting thing is my family, my children always say to me, I have the age of 8, the inner age of 8. So I don't need to do much to look at the world like a child. I still do. I still am bewildered by the world. I'm still enchanted by the world. I think that is what children have. They still have the amazement about it, and they still ask the big questions. That makes, for me, children my favorite audience. A child takes a story very serious, but nevertheless knows very well it's a story. A child still asks all the big questions about life and death. What is a human being? What is an animal? And what is the most wonderful thing is when you write for children is they are shapeshifters. Whereas we, when we grow up, stop shifting shape. I believe that a child still can imagine to be the dog who walks past it. I believe a child still can say, oh, what if I were the fly on the wall? I think children are much more aware they are part of everything, and that the shape we are taking is just a random one, is not very important. And when I'm with grown-ups, I sometimes want to shake them a little bit and say, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten that we are everything, and everything is ours. And to write for children makes you very aware of that, and very aware of how important storytelling is. I get letters from dying children. I get letters by now from grown-ups who were in wars or abused as children, and they say, your stories give me a shelter. Your stories makes me understand. And if a storyteller can do that, build shelter from the storm, but talk about the storm, that is for me my task.
How very brilliantly put, Cornelia. Clearly, your passion and love for children and children's writing is, sort of seeping and oozing through this computer screen right now. You've been writing, children's stories and children's books for many, many years.
Yes.
And as they say nowadays, the generation gap is shrinking. Every few years there's a new generation.
Yeah.
In your experience, what are the changes you're seeing in your readers, which is, children? So over the years, what are the kind of preferences or habits or the kind of fan mail you receive or the feedback you receive? What sort of changes are you seeing in children over the years?
I think one big change is that, for example, they are very young writers. So each time I get a complaint, oh, children don't read anymore, I answer, but they write. And it is so interesting. That also is a contradiction. Of course they read. They read a lot. It is a legend that children used to read so much. I never had children in my class who loved to read. I was the only one. I think it's a myth, but children love story, and they always did. And that has not changed. What has changed, I think, is they can know so much more about the world by going on the internet, talking with friends all over the world if they want to, which is such a huge thing to happen. When I lived in a little town in Germany, I would have never had a chance to talk with a child on the other side of the world. I would never have had a chance to look at images from many countries, to read almost every book on a computer screen. So I think there is of course always danger in everything, but I think the chances this brings at the moment, it's also a very democratic chance for all of us. It's not the rich anymore only who can travel the world. It's not, the children don't have to look through the eyes of their teachers only. They can look through their own eyes and teach each other. I have seen short stories from children of 11 that humbled me. And when you ask them how long you've been writing, they tell you they've been in a writers group online. They have been exchanging stories. And what I also love is they work together very often. I think we become more collaborative at the moment again. And the cult of the individual that can be very important can also isolate us from each other. And children do not think by now, oh, this is only my book and nobody else can, be involved. No, they say, oh, I wrote this with my 2-3 best friends. And for me, that is something very new that I had not seen 10 years ago, because it was not possible. And it is brought through technical progress, which is a very interesting thing, that can happen in such strong ways.
You mentioned something very interesting about children sort of participating more in the process of writing than what they were doing earlier. And how is that then reflecting into their habits or their preferences as readers? Do you see then children having a deeper understanding of the written word or of a story? I mean, are you seeing that because they are better writers, now their appreciation of stories is at a certain layered level?
I think in parts you do notice that, though I always had a very high opinion when it comes to that of children, because they do take stories so important. So it's interesting, wherever in the world I do an event, I love to do 10 minutes of reading, but then it's question and answer for me. That is what I come from for. And every single time, I swear, A grown-up comes to me afterwards and said, "Oh, Cornelia, the children ask such clever questions." And I say, yes, that's what they always do. They ask the better questions because they're so focused on the story and they understand what story does, that it helps them explore other ways of themselves, of the world. And that is a very serious tool. What I notice is they get more active discussing writing. So now a child will ask me about my process. It wants to see my notebooks. It will start copying it. I get photos from children who hold up their notebooks that they just started because I showed them how to do it. So that is changing. And I do much more discussions with young writers. So when I do events, I always say, who of you is writing? Please don't hesitate to ask me how I do it. I do regular chats online. I love that you do this festival because that is the right way to do it. And it's still something people have to get accustomed to, that it is so easy to meet by now. I so often have schools where I say, no, I cannot come. I have no time, but I can do a Skype event with you. And by now it slowly starts that they say, oh, yes, maybe, but yeah, so children are much faster in that, of course, already, as you say, they grow up with this media. There's a new generation every 6 months at the moment. And I say that also to children, you are living in the most exciting and most challenging time, probably of mankind, because we never accelerated the way we do at the moment. It's frightening and invigorating at the same time. Our progress is so vast and so fast at the moment, as I think our history has never seen before. And our children are the ones who have to cope with it.
Right.
That's why that's why schools are still too traditional. Schools try to teach children for a world that's going away. So they have to teach them about the past, but they have to teach them the tools to deal with the future. And we all don't know what will happen. If it goes on like this, yeah, we all don't know where we will be in 10 years. We have not the slightest idea.
Certainly. And Cornelia, we've been receiving some questions on Twitter for you.
Yeah.
We don't have too much time, so I'll probably just take one question. I'm going to show it to you on your screen and then you can respond. So the question is from Katha. It says, does magic or mystical place inspire you, the manner in which they impress your characters?
Yes, that is a good question, because especially mystical place. When you look at my writing, it has always been inspired by magical places. The book that made me world famous was set in Venice, in Italy, which is one of the magical places. And each place I go to, that's why I also love to travel to festivals all over the world, adds something and inspires new characters. For example, I had been in Delhi 2 years ago, and you will see that Golden Yarn has already one Indian character, and he's a former lover of the Dark Fairy. I call him Shitira, and he's an Indian prince. He's dead, but he is following her like her guardian and her ghost. And that is the first trace you see of what India is starting to inspire. And you find those tracks all over my stories. Oh, she has been there, she has been there. And I try to have places inspire my characters very profoundly.
Wow. And Cornelia, one of the benefits of doing the LitFestX, a virtual literary festival, is that our viewers are now suddenly inside your living room and probably your study room. I'm seeing this wonderful painting behind you. Tell us a little about it, and if possible, give our viewers, a peek of, your study and how you're writing.
for my study, I sadly would have to take you all through the garden to my writing house. I have a tiny house in the garden, not so tiny, where I have all my writing. And at the moment, my son sleeps there with his girlfriend. So we cannot walk in there. But this is my dining room, as you see. And it's also, as you see, as with all writers, also a workroom. Because these are at the moment all books that go to schools or journalists or somewhere. And I show you, this is my hallway. You see, I have a lot of colors in my house. This is the original of the cover of the Thief Lord that I bought from the illustrator in England. This is our office, all in Halloween mood because my assistant is obsessed with Halloween. And there are books from all over the world. You see a little bit from all kind of countries in all kind of languages. And then I hope the connection does not fail now. I have a drawing room upstairs. So we go now to the first floor. And I will try to show you, going out on the balcony, show you my garden and the writing house. Let's see whether that works. Do you see anything?
Yes, absolutely. We are seeing a lovely swimming pool.
Yes. I'm not good with the camera, as you see. There's a tiny house in the garden behind the pool. Let me see it. No, Cornelia is too stupid to do it.
Don't worry, Cornelia.
Yes.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. We just got a glimpse of the writing house. You know, Cornelia.
The last one, this is my drawing. And now back to better reception. Here we are. Back to the Colombian painting.
Cornelia, that's incredibly kind and very sweet of you, you know, to so candidly take us through your home. I'm sure many children and your readers who will watch this recorded video will really be enamored with the fact that they were able to get a peek inside where you stay and how you work and how you're writing. Thank you so much for joining us, Cornelia. I know it's been an early morning for you in Los Angeles. It's late at night in Mumbai. And any words you have for LitFestX and for our viewers?
I hope I will be back many times to LitFestX. Oh, I still don't get the name right. To this wonderful festival online. And I can't wait to come to Jaipur in January to be in India. And I hope one day we meet in person.
Certainly, certainly. Thank you so much, Cornelia, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.